November 11th, 1813, the Battle of Crysler's Farm. The United States Army has invaded Canada and is driving on Montreal. Outnumbered 4-1, can the defenders of Canada stop them? Find out today on The Die is Cocked. Not again. Hello, I'm Bruce. Welcome to the basement. The Canadian and American nations, whose common memories of old, unhappy, far-off things and battles long ago, not only contribute to their separate heritages and traditions, but form a bond between two friendly peoples. That's the inscription on a plaque on the monument to the Battle of Crysler's Farm near Morrisburg, Ontario. Canada and the United States have been the best of friends for most of the last 100 years or so, and we share the longest undefended border in the world. But that wasn't always the case. On June 18th, 1812, the United States declared war against Great Britain. The reasons were many, but the main causes of the war were the British habit of stopping American ships on the high seas and impressing any of their crews who might just possibly perhaps be British into the Royal Navy, Britain's policy of providing aid to the indigenous peoples on the western borders of the United States in their struggles against the Americans, and the fact that a lot of Americans wanted to annex Canada. There was a feeling among some that the revolution would not be complete until the British had been thrown off the North American continent. The British had actually rescinded their policy of stopping American ships and impressing their sailors before the United States declared war. However, word of this change of policy had not reached Washington before the declaration of war, and by that time, Congress wasn't going to say, "Oops, my bad, sorry, let's forget the last couple of weeks never happened." Wars are a lot easier to start than they are to stop. As Britain had her hands full fighting Napoleon in Europe, she lacked the troops to make a major offensive in North America. Therefore, most of the war consisted of various attempts by the Americans to conquer Canada. Attacks on Upper Canada, which is now the province of Ontario, were defeated in 1812 and the first half of 1813. Late in 1813, the Americans decided to make their main effort in the east against Montreal in Lower Canada. Montreal was the greatest city in British North America, and if it could be taken, then Upper Canada would be cut off from reinforcements and supplies, and must surely fall to the Americans. The plan was to take Montreal in a pincer attack. One army, numbering 8,000 men under General James Wilkinson, would travel down the St. Lawrence River in boats and barges. Another American army of around 3,000 men would march down the Chateauguay River. Hit from two sides, it was hoped that Montreal would fall. This plan was not decided upon until late in the year, really after the campaigning season, and if anything went wrong, there would be no time to regroup. Things did go wrong, of course. A small force of French-Canadian militia defeated Hampton's army at the Battle of Chateauguay on October 26th. Undeterred, Wilkinson's force kept going. But Wilkinson's force was being pursued down the St. Lawrence by a polyglot British force commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Morrison of the 89th Regiment of Foot. With the British force being accompanied by gunboats, and able to move faster than some of the American slower barges, Wilkinson decided to turn and attack Morrison's force at a farm owned by John Crysler near the town of Morrisburg, Ontario. James Wilkinson was not much of a soldier. He had some organizational abilities, but never had much luck on the field of battle. The biggest strike against him was that he was, in fact, a Spanish spy. Yes, one of the senior generals in the American Army was working for a country allied with Great Britain. Wilkinson took no part in the battle, however, and entrusted the task of defeating the British to his subordinate, John Parker Boyd, with a force of between 2,500 and 4,000 men. The British and Canadian force, consisting of about 800 men, was outnumbered by between 3 and 5 to 1. This is what our battlefield looks like today. We're playing on Eric's table, so you know the terrain is going to look magnificent. Bob will be Lieutenant Colonel Morrison today, while Mark will play his subordinate, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Pearson of the 49th Foot. Perry and I will play the Americans. Perry will be Brigadier Swartout, and I will be Brigadier Covington. Eric has designed the scenario and will be the game master. The British force consists of most of the 49th and 89th Regiments of Foot, the Canadian Voltigeurs, the Canadian Fencibles, the Dundas Militia, about 30 Mohawk warriors, some guns from the Royal Artillery, and a handful of Provincial Dragoons. The British also have the support of a gunboat on the St. Lawrence River. The Americans start with Swartout's and Covington's brigades, about 6 regiments of infantry supported by artillery, on the table. Boyd does not start on the table, but will be bringing up more troops when he comes. Here is what the beginning of the battle looks like on the map. The Americans have a deep ravine to cross, which will slow down their advance considerably. The obvious first target for the Americans will be Pearson's advance post, held by some companies of the 49th Foot and the Canadian Fencibles, and a 6-pounder of the Royal Artillery. It is now time for the Americans to begin their attack. The Americans advance and immediately come under fire from the British batteries on shore, as well as the gunboat. Mark advances the Mohawks through the trees to skirmish with the Americans, while Bob moves his main body forward to take the fight to the enemy, as the real Morrison did. The U.S. Army surges forward to meet the advancing British. General Boyd has arrived on the table and has brought more artillery with him. However, there's no place for it to deploy. Mark fires upon my troops with Pearson's advance guard. I lose a stand to British fire, and then fire back. It is my first die roll of the game, but, true to form, I roll a 1. More British fire comes during the British offensive fire phase. I'm getting shot to ribbons by Mark's hot die rolling, and the depleted 9th U.S. Infantry falls back. Meanwhile, Bob does the same thing to Perry, causing casualties and disorder. Britain's loyal Mohawk allies make life difficult for the 14th U.S. Infantry in the woods. If you go out in the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. Meanwhile, I continue to have bad die rolls, and continue to have bad die rolls, but I finally manage to disorder Mark's advance guard. Bob sees his chance, and sends the 89th sweeping forward. Perry has advanced into Bob's charge range, and Bob goes charging in with cold steel. Perry fires and causes casualties, but the British will not be stopped. The melee is bloody. Both sides have factors in their favor, but the cold steel bonus tips it for the British. Both sides know that this will be the most important fight of the game. The 89th throws back the battered 21st U.S. Infantry. Bob now throws the 49th Foot into action against the 21st U.S. Infantry, while the 89th turn to face the 11th U.S. Infantry. Mark has not been idle while Bob is attacking Perry, and his artillery damages one of my guns. Mark charges the 16th U.S. Infantry with the Provincial Dragoons. Though I am disordered, I form a hasty square. Though these are only militia dragoons, I am disordered and have lost a lot of men, so the fight could go either way. Bob, aggressive as always, is hitting Perry everywhere he can to keep him off balance. Perry struggles to avoid a rout, but Bob rolls a 10 in melee. The 11th U.S. Infantry is thrown back, as is the 21st U.S. Infantry. Our advance has been a shambolic affair, and we are paying for it. Things aren't going well for the 14th U.S. Infantry either, as they are attacked by the Mohawks in the woods. Swartout's entire brigade has been savaged. You were probably thinking that we had forgotten to fight Mark's cavalry against my hasty square. I was hoping we would forget. Mark is victorious, and I lose a stand and withdraw. I send the U.S. 25th Infantry in a desperate charge to support the 21st U.S. Infantry's counterattack against Bob's 49th Foot. Disciplined volley fire inflicts heavy casualties as we charge in. The Green Tigers of the 49th are badly outnumbered. Now is our chance to break the center of the British line. Bob has only the Dundas Militia in reserve. But fortune favors the British. The 49th stands firm, and the American regiments are thrown back. At the same time, the 89th Foot destroys the U.S. 11th Infantry. Perry and I finally get reinforcements as Cole's brigade of the 12th and 13th U.S. Infantry Regiments arrive. Perry throws them into action against the Mohawks. Attacked from both sides, Britain's gallant indigenous allies are overwhelmed. It's the only American success of the battle. There are a few more U.S. reinforcements to arrive, but Perry and I have been thrown back to our start line. Sending more troops into the maelstrom would be like leading lambs to the slaughter. We concede the game. The British have won, and Montreal is saved. Well done, Colonel Morrison. The real Battle of Chrysler's Farm was just as complete a victory for the British and Canadians. Chrysler's Farm itself no longer exists. The battlefield was flooded during the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Only the strip of trees along the top edge of the table remains. The United States Army of 1813 was capable of winning victories when well led. This was amply demonstrated by William Henry Harrison in the Western Theatre of Operations. However, it suffered from many flaws and was generally no match for its British opponents. The American army that crossed the Niagara frontier in 1814 was a different matter entirely. Well-trained, well-equipped, and very well led, this army would give the defenders of Canada a run for their money, and there would be no more easy victories to set beside Chrysler's Farm. But that's a story and a wargame for another day. Thanks for joining me in the basement. Until next time, may your dice always roll true.